I, I talk about it because clients can be very much like the typical patient that doesn't listen to the doctor, that doesn't listen, gets the treatment, gets the prescription, and says, I'm still sick. Well, have you lost the weight? Have you gone on the exercise regimen? Have you done the things that I recommended you do? Well, kind of haven't done that. Well, there's a reason why we prescribe that. And I think that, it's really important because to keep they need to build the muscle and they need to build the discipline to do it. I'm engaging with customers that get it and they want to do it. But unfortunately, it does mean that some companies don't truly get the value out of it if they don't adhere to the recommendations and employ them.
And he was one of the best change champions I've ever had because people knew he was somewhat resistant to this, but
Right.
open-minded. And when he got fully on board with it, that was just like greased lightning. I mean, it just spread through the.
One of my conversations I had with the General Counsel who were helping, and they were trying to get the same reaction and saying, okay, so I'm a leader who's been asked to come in and make sure that the operations of my whole division, legal compliance, is better or works in a different manner. I am certainly exhibiting all those qualities and I'm laying down how the processes and everything needs to be. Isn't that everybody's job to just follow and get in line and get things done?
Yes.
What is this all change management and white glove treatment? Is it like a cultural thing? So I'm gonna get your reaction, Joe. What would you have said to that?
Hello, welcome everyone to the latest Swiftwater and Company webinar. Our topic today is one I'm very excited about. It's change management and change leadership. I'm joined today by my esteemed co-host, Danish Butt. Danish, good to see you again.
Absolutely a pleasure, Gary.
Danish, I know we have a lot of change management experts within Swiftwater, but today we decided to go out and have a special guest join us. And that's because early in my career, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet our guest today. His name is Joe Leno, and I consider him my personal change management guru and mentor because that's where I first got that experience on some significant projects working with Joe actually back at Home Depot. But Joe, welcome today.
Thank you, Gary. Danish, good to see you both, and I'm so happy to be here. And as Gary certainly knows, I'm very passionate about the topic of change and change management. I'm happy to talk about it whenever I have the opportunity and some of the interesting projects I've been involved with. And I've actually employed change management techniques in my personal life when, because change is nonstop. And I find that some of the techniques can be applied to personal life situations. And believe me, it's helped me. So thank you. Looking forward to talking with you.
Great to have you, Joe. I was going to say, at Swiftwater, we're all about practical stuff, hearing from the trenches, all the sort of cuts and bruises you get while being in the field. So those are the best kind of learning experiences.
Yes, agreed.
Well, Joe, let's just dive right into this exciting topic today. So I know you've got a great background from many different aspects about change management and change leadership. A lot of people listening today may not have that good foundation in regards to what exactly is change management from a company perspective. So can you give us some more background on how you would define change management and the different types of changes?
Yeah, so happy to do that. Change management often is thought of, if you think about it from the standpoint of a company implementing a project, it's almost as it's an aside or a not required component to the overall initiative. So there are several types. There's organizational change. That's when you think of if there's a merger occurring or a divestiture. It's not just about acquiring a company or selling a company or division. You have to think about how do you integrate or untangle, and that all affects process and people, and you have to be aware of that. And that type of change has to be managed with a certain amount of delicacy because of the people involved. And people could include not just employees, but it can include customers and vendors and so forth. Then there's changes in technology. So when companies decide they're going to automate supply chain or they're going to implement new, in your case, contract management systems, that has a profound impact on how people work. And That has to be factored when designing the strategy and roadmap for the change process. Then there's change in process. So organizations may be used to doing things a certain way. And if you're going to change that, again, these often occur as a result of technology or acquisitions or things like that. But that's a process, and you may often hear, well, we never did it like that before. Well, that's understood, but what's perhaps a better way to do it? And then there's the idea that change is ongoing. People, dial into or walk into their offices every day, and they can wake up to an announcement that is, could be seemingly insignificant, but to a group of people that it impacts directly, it's significant. So there's multiple dimensions and multiple change initiatives, and those are some of the categories.
Yeah, that's and what's near and dear to our heart, and what Danish and I primarily talk about is legal changes, and it's
Right.
not just technology, of course; it's processes,
Yeah.
and the people, how it's going to affect the people, and even the culture of the
Yes.
company is changing, which kind of leads me to believe, and I want Danish to jump in here too. A lot of what we're hearing, and I know Danish has heard a lot from GCs, is I've got to get AI implemented within our organization. And that's all they know sometimes. I just have to get AI implemented. So, Donish, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and kind of change related to that arena?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is how do you talk about it? When you dive into the details, a lot of it is about expectations. Did we set the right expectation? So, how do we talk about it? What do we want it to achieve? I'd be interested to know, is there a particular methodology? Is there like a silver bullet out there, Joe, about change management?
Yeah. So, great question, Danish. There are 9 or 10 really well-known change methodologies, and I won't go listing them all. I will say that two very popular ones, at least two that I've worked with, is the ADKAR change management model, which is often in line with ProSci, which you can go out and get a ProSci certification. And it's used a lot for technology introductions and technology affected change. And then there's one that I've also worked with that was actually my mentor, who was a McKinsey partner, was Kotter's 8-step change model. And that is something that, again, it's more organizational change directed. So if you're going to manage the transformation of an organization, that would be one that is often followed. But those are two of several, and they kind of all look alike. They have similar major phases. There's this thing called stakeholder assessment, where you need to understand what the understanding is there, what the culture is, and what people's perceptions are. You can't embark on a change initiative without understanding that. You need to know what you're going to be affecting, and what the reaction will be to it. And that's the stakeholder assessment is critical. And from that, you develop a strategy.
All right, AI is all in the news everywhere. I look online, I see all kind of stuff about artificial intelligence and implementing it within corporations, and it's the legal space is not immune from that. There's in fact that's an area that's being a lot of pressure put on GCs and other areas, but all areas of the company are being impacted by that, and there's lots of great opportunities there with different types of AI. And it's the challenge is it's changing so fast. It's faster than any other technology that's ever been implemented, but it's also got a lot of can have a lot of great value implemented correctly. And implemented correctly doesn't just mean a tool or large language model, because there's so many of them. That's part of the challenge. You're just almost overwhelming. So, Joe, let's spend a few minutes talking about that. And we actually are going to probably have a future webinar just on this specific topic. AI change management will be part of it, but we've got several things we're planning to dive in deeper into AI. So, Joe, what are you hearing in this space, and what kind of questions do you have? And then Donish and I can jump in and see what we have been hearing and
Sure.
working with clients.
So I'm old enough to remember when web technology was being introduced into enterprises to support internal process. And what happened is a lot of people had a perception of the value and the detriments of having that. People are going to be spending all the time browsing the web, shopping on whatever the shopping site at the time, and so forth. And then the same hype cycle happened with introducing mobile communications into companies. Well, we don't want people texting their family all day long. We don't, but we all know that there's been some incredible applications of these technologies to support business growth. I do think that with AI, we are in the midst, or perhaps even the beginning of the hype cycle, the biggest, most impactful hype cycle that there's going to be in technology for some time. But I don't believe it's all hype, but I also don't believe it's the magic bullet that's going to cure every business's issues. I think that if it's understood, again, there's that word, understanding, and if there's knowledge around how it can be applied to support what I call solutions, what I call enterprise solutions. How can you use it to best support your business? And then a real thoughtful approach to implementing it. Then I think it can live up to some of the hype. I'm still learning about AI. I've done my share of studying of it. And I know I have colleagues, former colleagues of mine, that are working for AI firms that they love it, but they're also a little bit struggling with how do you explain it to the customer? Because you guys know, in the end, the customer's always going to say, how do I know I'm going to get the return on investment with this? How do you do that? So you have to be able to speak to that. And I think it's a very impactful story if you can speak to that, to rationalize the investment. So I think that AI is it's more than interesting. It is literally transforming how companies do business. We're seeing it in the headlines every day and so forth. That's my thoughts on it. I don't know if you have any questions about that, but change needs to play a major role in supporting those initiatives. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. But I can tell you from my experience, and I had a separate AI based company, so I know more about AI than many people. But still feel like I'm still learning because it's just growing and changing so fast. I will say, number one, it's the real deal. There's a lot of hype around it. There's no doubt about it, and a lot of overhype and a lot of specialized applications, I would say. But I will say it's the real deal. I will also say it's early innings, just like you said. It's kind of like some of the early software innings where you had, think back in the day, and some of our younger audience won't even remember this, but we had different applications for everything. So, you had something to do a word processor. You had something else to do a spreadsheet. You had something else to do pictures and graphs and presentations. And then Microsoft came in with the whole concept of Office and combined all that with a similar user interface. I kind of get a feel of that for AI right now, although a lot more powerful on steroids from the standpoint of there's lots of bits, all kind of different applications out there, but right now they're still very, on one hand, specialized, the applications that are being developed. On the other hand, very broad because doing prompting in some of the large language models, you can do pictures you can write, you can do so many broad things. So it's kind of both ends of the spectrum. The other thing is it's just literally evolving and changing at light speed, and just trying to keep up with it is a huge challenge. So some of the things you mentioned, and this is something that Swiftwater is going to get into, is more helping companies prepare for AI. Change management is part of it, but also internally, do they have the right infrastructure? Do they have the technology involved with that?
Oh,
Do you have the right mindset on how to jump into that? And can you typically, hopefully, start small and grow with that instead of trying to go big bang with it as
well,
well? All these things are just stuff that needs to be discussed. And I hope I didn't jump the cart there, Danish, but that's just my perspective on where things are at right now.
My opinion on that is if I have to list down all the roles that we deal with on a daily basis, whether you are a vendor selling AI, whether you're a business user at the end of AI, whether you're a legal team member who is still thinking, how do I get AI and which one is the right one for me? Or if you're a procurement person trying to get a contract lifecycle management system in. While we're in the hype cycle of any technology, there's a lot of focus on feature and functionality. I think what I'm hearing from you and the way we're trying to guide the client is look at the ultimate value. So for that, you ought to understand whenever you embrace a technology, what the starting points and what the ending points are, and whether that match with the value statement. So going back
Yes.
to your point, Joe, like, are you able to communicate the value? Because that is ultimately going to determine the success, and not necessarily like, hey, I mean, it can give me better cat pictures,
Right.
But that's what I'll leave it at for today's conversation.
I love the terminology you have for change. Instead of change management, you like to call it change leadership. But before we jump into that one, tell us, the audience, a little bit about yourself. Why are you known to me as a mentor and a guru in this space?
So, Gary, as you're well, I've been doing this a long time.
Yes, you have.
I was introduced to the idea of change management as a formal practice way back in the late 90s when I was working with my mentor, Dave Douglas. I'll give him a shout out here. He really helped me understand that you don't just affect change on a population without leading it, without introducing whatever it is you're introducing. And that's what I realized back when I was working for BIC, the pen lighter and shaver company, global consumer products. It was, they were just introducing, they were not even introducing, they were just deploying technology, based on the latest and greatest. And I'm amazed that I still see that. And we can have conversations about AI with regard to that. But I've come to realize then, and I believe it more and more now, is you don't manage change, you lead it. It's managing change kind of invokes this notion that there are pieces on a playboard, and you're kind of moving them around. And there is some of that orchestration that's required. But the change leadership implies that you're out in front of it, that you've organized this, and that you're pursuing it in a manner that is going to be understandable, acceptable. You can manage expectations and so forth. That's why I prefer the term change leadership, because as experts in change, we should be leading the change, not just managing it.
Absolutely. So, and we've been through many projects. Donish has, I have, you have. I've done them through internal within a company itself, and then also as a consulting now. And I've seen it from different viewpoints. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the major barriers are to implementing change. Specifically, we're going to kind of focus in on logical and process changes related to technological implementations. Today is going to be really our core thought, now that we've laid that foundation down. But
Right.
I know for me personally, I worked at Cox Enterprises
Excuse
internally for a number of years, and we had multiple different divisions. Each division we used the term fiercely independent. So that was just the company culture, company structure.
Right.
But most of our projects were enterprise wide. So it led into a lot of change leadership opportunities, which was a challenge there because unlike most companies, the central organization didn't really dictate and drive major changes, which I understood for a divisional level, but at the enterprise level, you really need that. And that did hurt some of our initiatives. I'll just admit to, although
Right.
we had change management experts internally within the team and sometimes outside consultants. So getting those leaders on board and understanding about the project or initiative and getting their weight behind it and buy-in to filter down was oftentimes a challenge. So that's one barrier I'm aware of. You two may have other barriers that you've seen commonly occur.
Well, getting buy-in, especially executive buy-in, is one of the most critical factors of success if you're talking about changing. Typically, in the past, I've seen where you say, well, we're going to do organizational change. Leaders tend to get a little nervous about that because what do you mean you're going to change the organization? Our organization is fine the way it is. What I think now what's evolved is we're talking about understanding the organization. Where are they now? And where does the company want to go? Whether it's multiple divisions, whether it's multiple functional teams or one functional team. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? What do you define as success? So that is a big deal. And if you get buy-in from whoever is the perceived leader of that or the known leader of that, an endorsement of it, and in fact, the visibility participating in the process is so critical. When I was very young in my change years, I didn't appreciate how important it was for let's just say the occupational level workers to see the leaders and speaking about and modeling the behavior. But it becomes very critical because they see what they see is if they think this is good and if they're starting to practice the behaviors, well, I should do it. And, I know at some point today we'll talk about how do you drive adoption of these new behaviors. But it's really critical getting that buy-in. It's also really critical that the client or whoever you're working for, in this case, it could be internal, so you could have internal stakeholders, know that you know them. How do you get to know them? I had one customer, large pharmaceutical customer, and they're still a very large and successful pharmaceutical company, where they saw themselves as having a culture of innovation. But what was really interesting is when we did this assessment to understand where they were, and you asked them, define what that means to you. What does that mean? They could never put their finger on something that they did that was really innovative, and let alone define, well, how do you do that? What's the process for that? So what we came out realizing was that that was an aspiration. They wanted to be a culture of innovation, but they weren't yet there. But they had the courage and fortitude to want to pursue it, which was great because we got to use that. That's another thing, Gary, when we worked on ITT, one of the things that the CIO said was, how long is this going to take? There's a perception that change can be done in a finite period. Actually, change is kind of like, once you get it started, you really don't want to ever let it stop. And there's ways to manage that and direct it. But in ITT's case, his question was quite literally, when are we going to be done? And my response to him was, hopefully you're not. Hopefully you understand that we have to put guardrails around this. And you want to have a controlled burn of adoption and change versus a wildfire, because they get out of control and you want to do that. So those are some of the things that are really important to advise up front to whomever you're working with to make this happen.
That's all good points, Joe. And I'm going to pick on Danish a little bit here, because as I think about some of the projects I've worked on, Danish, when you're talking to prospects, usually we get to the topic of change management, and I know they just jump up and down, and they're more than willing to shell out lots of dollars for that because they see the value of it, right?
I know where you're going with that, Gary. I was going to play devil's advocate to what Joe said. I'm going to channel one of my conversations I had with the General Counsel that we're helping with, and they were trying to get the same reaction and saying, okay, so I'm a leader who's been asked to come in and make sure that the operations of my whole division, legal compliance, is better or works in a different manner. I am certainly exhibiting all those qualities, and I'm laying down how the processes and everything needs to be. Isn't that everybody's job to just follow and get in line and get things done?
Yes.
And what is this all change management and white glove treatment? Is it like a cultural thing, so on? So I'm gonna get your reaction, Joe. What would you have said to that conversation?
Well, I would say, can you demonstrate to me how it is you're modeling the behavior, what it is you're doing? Because I will say, Danish, to step aside from this particular topic right now, one of the great ways to drive understanding and then adoption of that is to have those people visibly seen demonstrating the behavior. So I would ask that question and I would say, well, how do people know that you're doing it that way? Excuse me. How do people know that you're doing it that? How do you showcase that? And usually what I get is a lot of dead air. Well, I got interviewed by corporate communications and I told them about what I'm doing. Well, how many people effectively read that and then are able to transfer that from understanding, presuming they do, to actually doing employing those behaviors? And again, you'll get a lot of silence. So I'm not afraid to challenge assumptions in organizations, and you will get people that they question, well, how do I measure it that it's going to be successful? And there are qualitative and quantitative ways to do that. I think the important thing that I like to speak to, especially if the CFO is in the room or something, I like to say there are metrics we can implement and measure as a result of the strategy work we do to make sure that we can measure or monitor and measure and report back to show progress. So I cited the one example of the pharmaceutical company that considered themselves an innovative culture. So naturally, we drilled into, well, how is it that you educate people about innovation techniques, and so forth? And what we were able to set metrics on were those things. Some of them maybe had some effect on driving innovation, but building cohort groups or teams that collaborate together, whether synchronously or asynchronously. How is that done? Can we be a part of some of those sessions to better understand and talk to those people? So I think it makes the people that are paying for the change very comfortable if they know that you're including something that's going to help them see if this is actually happening or not. And that's where the metrics, they're critical, absolutely critical.
You're starting to dive into what success looks like and some tips that we can give to people, which is great. That's what we're very practical on this webinar series. We like to give that. So I would like to dive more into that. But before we do, I just want everyone, I'm sure most anybody in our audience listening to this has had examples of projects or initiatives or especially if they're major initiatives where change management, change leadership was either not there or was not there correctly or only halfway there. So, but I think we can all agree when it after the fact, everyone recognizes they probably should have done some things differently to make the project or initiative to be successful, but they don't always get that up front. So part of our role is to help explain, been there, done that. Let's help you understand how important this is. It's just very important to lay that foundation work, but it is hard for sometimes leaders and people involved with the project. There's always that natural resistance to change, to prepare for what's coming. And it is a lot of work and effort, but it's well worth it based on all of our experiences, I know. So let's just jump in there. Then you started touching on it. Give us some of those practical tips, Joe. I know you just mentioned kind of culture and the audiences that we work with. And I know regardless of what the initiative is, that's really important to know and understand.
Yeah, well, it's hard to, I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge to boil it down to a tip or, that makes it almost underserves what I think you're getting to. I would say, when I talk about modeling the behavior, that's really, really important. So if a recommendation is, hey, we're no longer going to send Excel spreadsheets via email and expect that people are going to review those, provide feedback on them in a way that is manageable and productive. If we use a new system, we can show you how to use the system to essentially accomplish what you're looking for, but in the system. And then we get all these other benefits and features. That's an important part of it. And we'll document that and report back on that. So that is modeling behavior is critical. Communications, even long preceding the actual initiative. If one of your customers is agreeing to implement a contract lifecycle management system, the communication to the constituent groups has to begin immediately, announcing that it's happening. Answering questions like, what does that mean to the business? What does it mean to you? What is it going to be involved? Will you be trained? Will you be given the tools, the job aids, and so forth to help you understand not just what's coming, but how to use it? And that's really critical. And so a tip is, you can't avoid communications being part of it. And then defining of the goal. Defining or whether it's one goal or several goals, those goal definitions are super critical to be communicated and educated about. So people say, are we still on track? Are we doing that? Are we going to ever get to where we want to be with that? The answer should always be yes, here's where we are. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing next. And this is how far away we are from achieving our goals. So those three things combined are really critical. I will say an anti-tip, the opposite of helpful, is over communicating. If you're sending things out, hourly or daily on topics that don't require that, people will their eyes will glaze over. They're like, oh, here's another email. All right, I'll, see if I can read it. So it's really important, not just what to do, but what not to do. And that's really, really critical. All that working together through an orchestrated effort is really critical. And I'll say, in and of itself, having someone knowledgeable in this, orchestrating it, is super, super critical. If your team at Swiftwater is doing that, kudos to them. I'm sure they are. That's what has to happen, because anytime any of these aspects could start to spin out of control. I hope I
Absolutely.
answered the question.
You did, absolutely. And that communication is key. And I've seen that be good communication and bad communication, like you said. So the thing that I have found is having a good feedback loop. As you have that
100%.
communication and starting off initiative correctly with a kickoff meeting and helping set all the foundational for why you're doing it, so and people understand and what's in it for me, type thing, and
Right.
laying out that plan so they know it's not going to be a 2 month project. Typically it's going to be these bigger initiatives 6 months to a year, in
Right.
many cases with lots of different moving parts. But how's it really affecting their day-to-day job and what's the end result look like? And I've just been amazed, especially when I'm working in the legal space with lawyers and support staff and the business people who interact with them, hearing firsthand their feedback and what their concerns are, what their objections may be, and how they get feedback into improving the process is absolutely critical for that buy-in as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
I do want
And
to ask Joe on that
yeah,
point. Let's say in a big 100,000 employee organization, you might have 6,000 IT folks, right? And so when you do an IT project, you've got considerably more resources. But if you're talking about smaller functions in the corporation where legal might be 80 folks, right? And
sure.
clients might be 20 people across the world stretched out for time. And so when we talk about change management and change leadership, is there like a project size? Is there a threshold? Or are there tips or anti-tips, as you say, that for those kind of lean teams that are applicable?
So I want to preface what I'm about to say with, there's really not a project that's too small that won't benefit from some orchestration of change, employing some of the approaches that I mentioned. Now, if you have the CEO moving from an office to another office in another building, that's not quite a change that would probably warrant a formal investment. But even with that, there's probably consideration given to what does that mean for board meetings and so forth and so on. I'm trying to use the absurd to illustrate this point. I would say no. I've seen it. I've worked on initiatives where functional teams, a singular functional team, needed a focus change effort to adopt the technology. And we employed a lot of the same practices to help them through it. One of the things that when I had my consulting business in Spirix, one of the things that we did was what we called a reboot camp. And it was a branded engagement where we engaged functional teams and we configured the tools to work specifically for that functional group the way they wanted it to work. What were the goals for their use of the technology? And then we brought in technologists to configure the system because it was about configuration, not customization. And you configured it for them. And then they absolutely embraced the technology. They were singing about it because they had no idea how powerful it could be. And when we did that and we rode shotgun with them as they were using it, and we designed our we adapted our training, we adapted our communications for them specifically, and we helped manage it. They were very successful. What they became is they became the case study for the rest of the organization for how these tools and capabilities could benefit the rest of the company. And what it did was drove this outreach to the organization that was leading the change, and we were a vendor supplying that. So it was that outreach generated so much desire for these boot camps or reboot camps that it started to become a model for them to repeat on other big initiatives. So, no, I really believe that change should be factored in every project that there's investment on. If you're investing in something to make the firm better, more efficient, more cohesive, then change should be a part of the approach.
That's a great take on it. So it's less about skill or capabilities or budget. It's more about sort of that approach that
Yes.
that you should have that in the back of the mindset. Some of it might require more, some initiatives might require communications, and that might be it.
Hey, I'll share with you an anecdote from a customer I had a few years ago, and they were a large, massive telecommunications company based out of Denver. And you talk about $100,000 person organization. I think they had 100,000 people just working in the field, not those that were in data centers or home offices. And one of the nuts to crack was, well, we can't forget about these people that some of them don't even have laptops, or at least laptops with the same software. How do we keep them involved? So we had to design a mobile engagement aspect to the change process. Communications had to come through the phones. They had all the smartphones, but that had to happen that way. They had, if feedback was required, we had to give them a mobile ready ability to do that. And I had the opportunity to speak with several people in the field, and that's what we found out, is that they were telling us that they've never, meaning the parent company has never done anything like that before. And that built credibility for the customer, that, okay, you're thinking about us. You're thinking about, an obviously important constituency of their organization. So it's really important. That's where the strategy comes into play. You really need to understand, how are we going to engage all, if not just the significant dimensions of the organization?
Yeah, all those, as you're talking about that, Joe, it made me think about, how important it is to get some of those early wins and get
Yes.
people engaged, and not in a superficial way, but a very meaningful way and a very transparent way, where the people themselves who are being impacted by the change get fired up, just like
Yes.
the example you said. And people hadn't reached out to them before. Just the fact that you're reaching out to them, but then getting them engaged and listening and hearing their voice. And what do? They tell all the people around them, all their coworkers, and then it just starts
100%.
spreading, like you said. And that's like word of mouth advertising for someone, right? I mean, you can't beat that. You really
Right.
can't, because hearing from your peers in a positive light is really what's going to drive a lot of that change. Hearing from your peers in a negative light spreads like wildfire. So
Yes.
putting it in a positive light up front, and someone that they can generally trust and believe, is just super important to these initiatives as well. So I know where I'm at. We used to hand select some people to be what I think you and I have termed before, change champions as
Yes.
well. Some of those come naturally, like the example you gave, but some other times in the projects we pick people, and I think sometimes people make the mistake of picking people they think will be very on board with the idea initiative, and that's good to have, especially if they have some technological background. If it's a technical initiative, I know in my case, I had a lawyer that I got involved, and he had some resistance to what we were doing for a contract lifecycle management implementation. But the key was, he was open minded. So I said, I would love you to get working with us, because I don't have a problem with you sharing different perspectives and opinions. In fact, that's what we need to do, because I want to hear firsthand from you. I just ask that you be open minded to this, and then work with us as we work on our process, as we work on the technology, work on everything else. And he was one of the best change champions I've ever had, because people knew he was somewhat resistant to this, but
Right.
open minded. And when he got fully on board with it, that was just like greased lightning. I mean, it just
Right.
spread through the organization. So I'm sure you probably have similar stories that you could tell related to that, but how important that change champion type network, and
Well,
planning for it up front.
there's really, it's, you talk about tools that you use for change. There's nothing, in my opinion, more critical than the Change Champions Network. And you use that, I always tag on that network,
Okay.
because you're building that network of people, and you have to provide them the information, everyone the information and education to opt into that. It's really important that they understand it and opt in. That means they want to be a part of it. Recruiting can be a challenge, because everyone is
Busy.
busy with their day job, and wow, I gotta show up at a monthly meeting, I gotta do training. But when you explain to them and provide them the tools and capabilities to do it, and it will help their peers, and it will help the network, then they tend to be a little bit more open to it. Now, you can't overly burden them, and I've seen that too, where it's like, well, we have change champions, so they'll just do this. We'll tell them, they'll do what they're told. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Good luck. I mean, why would they want to participate? What's the value to them to doing it? And, I've had some situations where we've recommended that there be something that's put in their annual review where they participated in a change network, and this is what they did. Because a lot of corporations want to see that type of corporate citizenship, right? They want to be able to know that their employees are invested in the company's success, not just for their own paycheck, but that they want to see this type of change succeed, because if that succeeds, the company succeeds. So really incredible.
Any other kind of rewards type programs or initiatives you've seen to be beneficial?
Well, recognition is always, that's why I mentioned the annual review type thing. The challenge is sometimes it requires investment. Now you're talking the company to, and you'll hear some people say, well, maybe we can give some kind of perk. And that requires, well, who gets what? How much are you going to give them? How do you measure that? The performance. So it's typically recognition of some sort, maybe some kind of certificate of achievement that they can put on the wall behind them or something like that, which is an inexpensive, but recognition, acknowledgement of effort, always big. People want to be recognized if they're doing something that is above and beyond. They want to at least know that they're being seen, and that's really critical.
Absolutely. We're getting kind of near the end here. Danish, any other kind of additional thoughts you'd like to throw in there?
No, I love what I'm hearing. I think I'd have to go back and think through the over communicating topic that Joe, you mentioned, that over communicating is always not a good strategy. I mean, that goes against conventional wisdom, right? And then pretty soon we see our email boxes getting 200 emails a day because you're CC'd on every initiative that's happening in the organization. And the conventional wisdom is over communication is the best strategy in change management. And you sort of kind of came in and smashed that one on the head. So
well,
that was
I will say,
for me.
So I'm sorry. I will say that we've developed comms plans where we not only give them examples of what are some of the we develop a comm plan and say this is the type of communication you use for this scenario, but we'll actually draft them templates and give them frequency. So we could say, this is the type of template you use for a project adjustment, timeline adjustment. And you want to be able to send this, at 2 weeks in advance, and then maybe a week in advance, and then do some type of T-minus countdown that, so people understand, okay, if this type of project timeline email is coming in, I got to pay attention to it. So
yeah, I like that. And
really,
then the other part I took on was that regardless of the size and importance of the project, you don't necessarily have to think of it change management as a person coming in. It's more of a mindset sort of an activity. Sometimes you can just embed the aspects of change management into how you're delivering that change, whether it be communication or setting the tone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a set of tool or people all the time.
right.
But there may be some correlation to the investment you're doing, right? If it is a big change for the organization, if it's a lot of investment, then you ought to think about change management as its own discipline, as important as you're thinking about or bringing in experts for the organization change or bringing in experts for process change.
Yes. Well, in my experience, these large projects, these enterprise shifting projects require people with specialized disciplines overseeing these various aspects. I've seen it also early in my change years where they relied on corporate communications to do a lot of this. And that's really distracting them from their primary responsibilities. And they can be quite good at it, but I think the whole profession has evolved that having experts in the different disciplines is really necessary. Sometimes you have to configure tools. And so you may want to have a usability person as part of that who is going to configure the tool to support the change effort and things like that. So that is where the size and scope of the effort really kind of drives the size and scope of the change effort associated with it.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of piggyback on that a little bit because I've had the unique ability to be within a corporate environment driving these major projects as an insider. And when we use internal people for change management, which has a lot of benefits to it, like you said, but at the same time, I've also brought in consultants to help. Typically, it wasn't just the change management, it was other areas. And why do we do that? Because the company I worked for at the time fully recognized that even though we had good technology people, good change management people, and resources, they all have day jobs. It's hard to get all the
Yeah.
work done, number one. Number two, the consultants can come in and bring in an outside perspective. They've been there, they've done that. If in the case of a CLM implementation, they've done usually numerous of those, and they know kind of where the pitfalls are and what's going to happen. Obviously,
Right.
a little different for every company based on their culture, but the same and overall approach seems to work. But they've seen where things have fallen off the rails, or they've seen where communication hasn't worked as well, and things that may be more tweaked to that particular initiative that someone
Right.
internal and corporate communications, for example, or other areas might not have that kind of exposure. So
Right.
that's been my experience. And of course, I've seen it on the other side now, working for Swiftwater as a consultant, seeing it and how to bring it in after the fact in some cases, or where it wasn't put into place because leadership didn't necessarily buy in early enough, and working through those and still trying to, make the project initiative a success, not just go live, but success to meet the overall business
100%.
objectives of what you're trying to do
Yeah.
in the first place.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Joe, as we get ready to wrap up?
Well, you just reminded me, Gary, of a customer where I was leading the proposal effort, and we actually rescued the effort. The client, one of the largest insurance carriers in the United States, if not the world, their IT department was trying to deploy a new claims management technology and set of processes, and they considered the parent company of who I was working for at the time. And the parent company was telling this insurance carrier that you got to do a lot of workshops, you got to do a lot of whatever. And those are all good things and all good tools to use. But when I was invited in by Microsoft to talk to IT, and Microsoft said, we've worked with Joe Leno, we've worked with these people before. I think you might want to hear their take on it. So I didn't know about the parent company's pitch before I did this. And we went in and we pitched them and we told them about how we approach, which is the readiness piece and then the strategy piece and then the series of things we do. We ended up winning the contract over the parent company. We were an acquisition. It was one of these things where it's not exactly the same as being an internal employee versus an external consultant, but we ran into this situation where, you have to be open to adopting or understanding the perspective of the customer and seeing it the way they see it, and then design an experience to support that, which is what we did. And ultimately that's understanding of the culture, understanding of the organization, their inherent biases, inherent resistance points is super, super important when you're designing the change experience. So I think as long as you're willing to do that analysis and not just shoot from the hip with regard to change and start to really kind of play that back to the powers that be, that becomes really critical.
And that's powerful, Joe. That's a great example to win the business from the parent company. That it's basically showing that you knew more about their internal operations and how the culture than they did. That's amazing. So
Yeah, I got a nice shout out from the COO of the company at the time about that. So it was nice.
If you made it this far, what we want you to take from this is that don't forget about change management when you're thinking about change. Again, there is a lot of material out there that can help you be more up to date on what tips and techniques you can use in your daily lives to make this better, to make you successful in your career, to make you successful in your professional goals, whether it be legal, risk, compliance, or any function that you're doing within the profession. And then there's Joe, their organization, ours, that help organizations like yours think through that in terms of what daily functions you're doing. So, for example, Swiftwater is focused on the Office of General Counsel. terms of legal risk and compliance. So when we think about change management, we think about it in terms of the psyche and the sort of the circumstances of your day-to-day operations. So reach out. You can learn more about us on our website, swiftwaterco.com. You can contact us from there using our contact form. Gary and I are available. And we'll let Joe. How can we find you, Joe?
Well, thank you, Danish and Gary. This has been such a fun experience. I could go on for hours talking about this. Gary and I have talked for hours about this in the past. So
It's always
thank you so
exciting
much.
conversation, Jeff.
I just would like to say that I appreciate the experience. I appreciate talking about it. Of course, as you alluded to, I'd be open to helping any company that's interested in understanding more about change management, and I can be, reached through LinkedIn and so forth. So it was great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
So thank you for sharing with me
Thank you,
all
Gary.
these years. But one of the quotes, and I'm probably going to mess it up here, but this is the way I remember it because it's very relevant to what Donis just said. It hit me in the face earlier in my career, because back then and even now, people look at particular technology, they look at it as the next new shiny object that's going to solve all my problems, the magic wand. And I know it sounds kind of weird hearing a consultant say this, but I loved when you first told me it's not about the technology. It's
Right.
about how you use the technology to drive business value. And that has just stuck
100%.
with me for all my life almost. And it reminds me, yeah, it's not about, and of course, vendors, they're trying to sell the features and functions. And some of the smart vendors sell the value proposition. And guess what? A lot of those vendors are the ones who win the deals. So, but I'll just wrap this up today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been very enlightening. I've learned new things even today from this as well. I appreciate the stories, the client examples, the wisdom that you've relayed to us.
I had a lot of fun doing this. If I may, one last point I would make. Gary, I've heard me often refer to myself as almost like a physician, where I will diagnose a problem and I will provide a recommended treatment. And it's comprised of these things these methods and these approaches we take to change. And I talk about it because clients can be very much like the typical patient that doesn't listen to the doctor, that doesn't listen, gets the treatment, gets the prescription, and says, I'm still sick. Well, have you lost the weight? Have you gone on the exercise regimen? Have you done the things that I recommended you do? Well, kind of haven't done that. Well, there's a reason why we prescribe that. And I think that, it's really important because to keep they need to build the muscle and they need to build the discipline to do it. And unfortunately, for a guy like me, that means that I'm engaging with customers that get it and they want to do it. But unfortunately, it does mean that some companies don't truly get the value out of it if they don't adhere to the recommendations and employ them. So that's just it. I had a terrific time. I would love to do this again. Thank you again. What a pleasure, Danish and Gary.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Gary.